do you make of this gradual reopening? It must be a relief for you as well, being there and having been in lockdown.
Yes, indeed. I have just come out from a 5-day lockdown myself. Over the last few days, we have seen very rapid adoptions across the new COVID policies across major cities in the country. But these adoptions are more aligning their local policies with the so-called 20 new rules that was actually announced on the 11th of November. So we are expecting a further broad-based relaxation based on those 20 rules, but the next step forward will likely to take some further time. So what we are seeing on the ground here is that on one hand, they are massively reducing the PCR test requirements to enter into public venues across all tier 1 cities. But on the other hand, they are actually putting in additional barrier for people to travel around the city. It's not like you have to be quarantined, but once you enter into another city, most likely you won't be able to enter into restaurants or many public venues within the first 3 to 5 days after 3 to 5 days of PCR test. So the way to reopening is likely to be a lengthy and relatively bumpy one. And with market probably already getting slightly ahead of itself when it comes to the optimism, when it comes to a very rapid full reopening, we would like to be cautious about the possibility for a zigzag-like reopening, which will include some of the setbacks on the way out.
So, Becky, I mean, we've got, for instance, Goldman Sachs suggesting that about 40% of the reopening story is being priced into markets right now. I know you're not an equity strategist, but what is your take on that? And, you know, when do you actually see the benefits of this reopening really becoming the key driver for the Chinese economy?
The key difference, in my view, is that the overall Chinese policy focus has clearly turned. So the direction is, for the moment, very clear. After the 20th Party's Congress, after the removal of all the political uncertainties, it's so clear that the focus has been reshifting back to economic growth domestically. And in terms of foreign policies, China has also been amending its relations with foreign countries, starting from the G20 meeting. So the overall directional change for the moment in the market, it's reflecting the change of expectation as well as positioning change. But the next leg forward would require sustainability in terms of such development when it comes to continued COVID reopening, continued economic recovery on the back of the COVID reopening. But we would like to be cautious here because we feel that during the initial phase of reopening, we might see a period of relatively lackluster growth recovery because people's adoption to COVID is not as fast as the rise of cases. For example, although they are relaxing the PCR test results, they are not really removing the quarantine requirement once anyone that's identified to be a positive case.
Becky, I mean, it's going to be very quickly here. It's going to be a bumpy road to get back to normalcy. What are you expecting in terms of growth? What sort of figures have you got for that? And tell us a little bit about how perhaps it could be impacted by slow growth externally, which could really hamper the manufacturing side of things there in China, and also a services side of the economy, which is massive as well, which would stutter too as we have these bumps along the way.
So based on all sorts of forecasts at the moment, China is the only major economy that's forecast to be growing faster in 2023 than 2022. But we actually have just downgraded the recent quarterly growth together with 2022 growth. We are now only looking for China headline GDP growing at 3% for this year, but that's actually laying the ground for a faster growth recovery into next year. So for next year, we're looking for a GDP growth that's above 5%, primarily driven by the recovery in domestic consumption. And we are looking for growth to come back more meaningfully in the second half than in the first half, because our base case is for COVID policies to remain somehow restricted for the first half of at least first quarter of next year. So a complete normalization is more likely to be a second half story next year.